All right, let's set the scene. It's the summer of 1943, and pretty much the entire fate of World War II is about to hinge on one single titanic battle on the Eastern Front. We are, of course, talking about the Battle of Kursk. This was it, Germany's last desperate gamble to try and turn the tide against the Soviet Union.
And look, when I say titanic, that is not an exaggeration. Kursk was and still is the single biggest, deadliest tank battle in all of human history. The scale of this thing is, well, it's almost impossible to really wrap your head around. But this one brutal fight would become the turning point for the entire rest of the war in the East.
And this right here, this is the battlefield. You see, after months of just unbelievably brutal winter fighting, the front line got bent into this really weird shape. It's this massive bulge, or what military folks call a salient, centered around the city of Kursk, and it's jutting way deep into German-held territory.
Okay, so how in the world did we get here? How did this giant bulge even form in the first place? To really get what's about to happen at Kursk, we have to rewind just a little bit and look at what set the stage.
So, you've got the German army just reeling from that absolute catastrophe at Stalingrad. I mean, they were on the ropes, but they weren't done just yet. In what was actually a pretty brilliant counteroffensive, Field Marshal von Manstein's forces managed to stabilize the front. They hit back hard, and they actually retook the key cities of Kharkov and Belgorod. And it was that counterpunch, that exact move, that created the Kursk salient.
And we're talking about a huge area. This pocket was 250 by 160 kilometers, just sticking right into the German lines. Now, if you're the German High Command, you're looking at this map and thinking, bingo. It looks like the perfect opportunity, right? You can just snip off the top and bottom of that bulge and trap hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers inside. It was an absolutely irresistible target. But here's the catch. It was also incredibly, blindingly obvious.
So you'd think that obviousness might give them pause, right? Well, not Hitler. He didn't see a risk. He saw an opportunity. He saw the perfect stage for what would be Germany's last great gamble in the East.
The German plan was codenamed Operation Citadel, and honestly, its ambition was just breathtaking. The idea itself was pretty simple, but the scale was immense. You'd have two massive armor pincers, one slamming down from the north, the other pushing up from the south. They would smash through the shoulders of the salient, meet right in the middle, and completely annihilate every Soviet soldier trapped inside.
And for Hitler, this was about way more than just taking back some territory. A win at Kursk would be a huge statement. It was meant to prove to the whole world that Germany was still the top dog after Stalingrad. It was meant to impress allies like Italy, who were starting to get a little shaky. And of course, it was meant to completely cripple the Red Army for the rest of the summer. Oh, and a dark side goal, capturing a massive new pool of slave labor for Germany's war machine. But here's the thing, not everyone was convinced this was a brilliant idea. A lot of senior officers, including the guy who literally invented the Panzer forces, Heinz Guderian, were passionately against it. He saw it as a completely pointless waste of Germany's last precious armored reserves. He basically pleaded with Hitler, saying, "Do you think anyone even knows where Kursk is? The entire world doesn't care if we capture Kursk or not. Leave it alone." He just thought the risk was way too high for such little reward.
But Hitler, well, he ignored the advice. He was determined to press on. The problem was, he kept delaying the attack. Why? He wanted to wait for his new wonder weapons to arrive at the front, especially the new Panther tank. But these delays, look at this, from May 3rd, pushed to June, pushed again all the way to July 5th. Those delays would turn out to be absolutely fatal, because they gave the Soviets the one thing that's more valuable than any tank, time.
And believe me, the Soviets did not waste that time. While the Germans were waiting for their new tanks, the Red Army was busy turning the entire Kursk salient into, well, the most heavily fortified battlefield in the history of warfare. Now here is the absolute game changer, the secret weapon for the Soviets. They knew everything. Thanks to some incredible intelligence coming from sources like the Lucy spy ring and British codebreakers, Stalin had a crystal-clear picture of Operation Citadel months before it happened. He knew where the Germans would hit, when they would hit, and exactly what forces they were bringing to the party.
So, armed with this perfect intelligence, Marshal Zhukov came up with a strategy that was both brilliant and incredibly daring. Instead of hitting the Germans first, he convinced Stalin to do the exact opposite. He said, "Let them come to us. Let them smash their best panzer divisions against our defenses. Let's make them exhaust themselves, bleed them white, and then, only then do we unleash our fresh reserves and launch a massive counteroffensive to finish them off."
And the result of that strategy? Well, it was one of the greatest feats of military engineering. in all of history. For 2 solid months, you had over 300,000 civilians working day and night right alongside soldiers, building this unbelievably complex defensive web. They were turning the entire salient into one giant tank trap.
I mean, just look at some of these numbers. They are absolutely staggering. They laid over 500,000 anti-tank mines. The German panzers were going to have to drive through some of the densest minefields anyone had ever seen.
And this wasn't just one line of defense, not by a long shot. The Soviets built 8 separate defensive belts, one layered behind the other. The total depth of this fortified zone was almost 300 kilometers. It wasn't a wall, it was a fortress in depth, designed to literally swallow an entire army whole.
So you've got the German gamble on one side and the Soviet fortress on the other. The stage was set for what would become the largest battle in all of history.
The raw numbers here at the start of the battle are just mind-boggling. I mean, just look at this table. The Soviets had gathered a force that outnumbered the Germans more than 2-to-1 in men and guns, and they had almost a 2-to-1 advantage in tanks. The disparity is huge. And then, on July 5th, the storm finally broke. The German offensive kicked off with a ferocious artillery barrage and wave after wave of aircraft. The clash was immediate, and it was unbelievably brutal. Just to give you an idea, that first day of fighting went down as the single costliest day of aerial warfare in all of history.
And Zhukov's plan, it worked perfectly. The German armored spearheads just smashed themselves to pieces against the Soviet defenses. You know those new Panther tanks Hitler waited all those weeks for? Well, they were rushed to the front and were riddled with mechanical problems. A ton of them broke down before they even saw the main Soviet lines. The ones that actually made it to the fight were bled dry by minefields, funneled into perfectly prepared anti-tank kill zones, and just ground down by an endless web of trenches. Every single meter the Germans gained came at a horrific price.
The German attack was grinding to a halt. It had completely failed to get that breakthrough it needed, and now the entire strategic situation was about to change for good.
And you know, in the end, the final nail in the coffin for Operation Citadel didn't even come from the battle itself. On July 10th, thousands of kilometers away, the Western Allies landed in Sicily. Hitler completely panicked. He needed his best panzer divisions over in Italy, now. So after just 1 week of fighting, he called the whole thing off. Germany's great gamble was over. It had failed.
And this, right here, this is the real meaning of Kursk. For the first time in the entire war, a huge German summer offensive was just stopped dead in its tracks. The strategic initiative, that's the ability to decide where and when the big fights happen, Germany lost it, and they would never get it back. From this point forward, it was the Red Army on the attack all the way to Berlin.
So yeah, the defeat at Kursk was absolute. It shattered the very core of Germany's tank forces and basically sealed their fate in the East. And it leaves us with this huge, fascinating question that people still argue about today. What if Hitler had actually listened to his generals? What if Operation Citadel had never even been attempted? What if Germany had saved all those men and tanks to defend against the Soviet attack that they knew was coming anyway? It's something to think about.